Is the 11th day of Chodesh Shvat, and we spent the end of yesterday learning the Mishnah at the bottom of Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, and our Amud for today is Tzadi Ches Amud Aleph. But to jump into it, we will review the Mishnah that we saw 3 lines up from the bottom of Tzadi Zayin Amud Beis, where the Mishnah tells us as follows: Hamafrish nekevel pischai, or zachar ben shtei shanim. If a person separated a female korban for his korban Pesach, or zachar ben shtei shanim, or a male korban that is older than 2 years, neither of these are good to be used as a korban Pesach. Yira ad she yistayv. In both of those cases, the animal should be left to roam around until it develops a mum, v'yimacher, and it should be sold, v'yiplu davar l'dava, and that money is then going to be used as a donation, a dedication to the Beis Hamikdash, l'shlamim, to bring a korban shlamim. Turning over to Tzadi Ches Amud Aleph, hamafresh pischa b'meis, if a person separated the korban Pesach and then died, lo yivenu b'nei achrav, his son is not allowed to bring that as a korban Pesach in his stead, l'shem Pesach. You cannot bring it as a Pesach, l'shem shlamim, you can bring it as a shlamim. And all of these dinim, the Mishnah is now, the Gemara is now going to discuss. Amar Rav Huna b'Reder Rabbi Yeshua. Says Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Yeshua, Shmami na tlas. From this Mishnah we learned 3 halachas. There are 3 inferences that are made by this Mishnah. All of them are correct. The first is, at least according to this Mishnah, some of them are machloksim, but Shmami na, we learn from this, Baalei chaim nirchim, that a live animal could be rejected, meaning could be permanently rejected, meaning that it is it's alive and it's well and it is permanently rejected. It can never be used as a korban, never ever be used as a korban. That is the point that Rashi makes here. If it is if it's rejected from being able to be used as a korban, then it is forever rejected. You cannot use it for anything, for any other korban. Because while it could, in theory, have been brought as a shlamim, were it to have been dedicated as a shlamim, since it was dedicated as a Pesach and cannot be brought as a Pesach, it's now out of the running to be a shlamim forever. That is point number 1. Says Ravona. Point number 2 that the Mishnah is teaching us is Shmamina dichui mi'ikara havadichui. The second din is that a dichui mi'ikara, that if you make a korban into something that it's ineligible for, mi'ikara, meaning from the beginning, it's not that it was eligible and then became ineligible at some point in time. It, from the moment that you attempted to make it eligible, it was ineligible. That is a dichui as well. That is a fully fledged dichui, and it is now out of the running to be a korban. Ushmamina, and the third halacha that we learn, Ushmamina, yesh dichui b'damim, is that there is dichui also with damim. Now, what exactly does that mean? So there are 2 kinds of kedushas that could apply to a korban. We've discussed this before, that there is a kedushas haguf, where the animal itself has kedusha, and there's kedushas damim, where the value of the animal has kedusha, meaning you owe the value of the animal to the Beis Hamikdash, but the animal itself is not kedushas haguf. Here, what you have is dichui b'damim, because since it was made into a korban, meaning made into a korban Pesach, and it could never be a korban Pesach, so then the kedushas haguf of korban Pesach never happens. It never becomes a korban Pesach, meaning it never rises to have kedushas haPesach. What it does have is kedushas damim, and even that kedushas damim could render this fungible item to be no longer able to be used as a korban at all. That's called the dichui. Since it couldn't be used for the thing that was attempted, it's now out of the running. Those are the 3 din that we learned. Okay, says the Gemara, quoting Hamafresh Pischa, a person separated his Pesach, that's the top of our Amud, and then he dies. Says the Mishnah, his son cannot bring it as a Pesach, he has to bring it as a shlamim. And we are now going to quote a brisa that seems to disagree with us. Tana Rabban, the brisa says as follows: Hamafresh is Pischa, a person that separates his korban Pesach v'meis and then drops dead. If his son was included, he was one of the registrants on this korban Pesach, he was planning on eating at his father's Pesach Seder, Pesach, then he can still bring it as a korban Pesach. But if his son was not registered on this Korban Pesach. He was planning on eating with his in-laws. Yevienu l'shum shlamim. Then he should bring it. Then this korban that he has inherited, he should bring as a shlamim l'shisha asar on the 16th day of Nisan, meaning on the first day of Chol Hamoed, not on Yom Tov. Says the Gemara le Yud Vav, meaning we would usually not write it as Yud Vav in the way that we write numbers today. We write it as Tezayin. But okay, le Yud Vav for the 16th in le Tezvav Eloi, meaning you could bring it on the 16th, you can't bring it on the 15th. Because the time of this brisa is of the opinion that nedarim and nedavos cannot be brought on Yom Tov, meaning voluntary korbanos that don't need to be brought that day are not allowed to be brought on Yom Tov. Now the Gemara questions, aside from that detail of the dates and times, the Gemara questions the premise of this brisa. We said somebody that separated his Pesach, said this is going to be my Pesach, and then he dies. When did he die? So, the Misa of Amos, when exactly did the father die? If you want to tell me that he died before Chatzos, if his son is registered on this Pesach with him, he's going to bring it as a Pesach. He's an Oinen. He became an Oinen that morning, meaning his father dropped dead in the end of the Korban Pesach there. So now he's an Oinen. Now, is an Oinen not allowed to have a Korban Pesach? We've noted before that Oinen is in fact allowed to have a Korban. He cannot have a Korban that day. That's the Aninus of Yom Rishon is deraisa, but that night lichara he could. So what exactly is the issue with him that day? So Rashi here points out that the Mes Kodim Chatzos means that Rashi points out Voiva Yom Chal Aninus Alei, he became an oinen that day. Bereisha at the beginning, and he doesn't have the obligation to bring the Pesach himself, and therefore he's not going to be so worried about becoming tummy that day. Meaning, if he became tummy, he'd be parted from it. So if the father dropped dead before Chatzos, then the son is an oinen, and he wouldn't be bringing it as a Pesach anyway. So when the Brisa says that cannot be that he died before Chatzos. So you must say that he died after Chatzos. So and his son is not included with him on this Pesach, then he should bring us to Shlamim. Says the Gemara Hakavase Chatzos. But from all of the previous Mishnahs and Gemaras in the last two daf, we've explained that Chatzos is koveya, that once Chatzos hits, this animal is now a Korban Pesach. And if it's not brought as a Pesach, then it's Dichu, meaning that the animal is Dachui. How could he then bring it as a Shlamim? Because it was an eligible Pesach, and now it's not. So, I'm a Rabba, change to Rabba, I'm a Rabba, la'olam demis kodem Chatzos. No, it has to be that he died before Chatzos. What does it mean that he should bring it as a Pesach? It means the Shum Pesach Sheni. He's going to bring it as a Pesach Sheni. This is the first answer that the Gemara offers. There are going to be 5. Option number 1 is he's going to bring it not for this Pesach, but for Pesach Sheni. That's what we're talking about. Option number 2, Abaya Amar. Litzdadim Ketani. The Brisa is supposed to be read as 2 separate halachas. Halacha number 1 is Meis Achar Chatzos. If he died after Chatzos, B'noi Memune Imai Yavi L'Shum Pesach. If he died after Chatzos, and his son was registered on the Pesach with him, then Yivi'en L'Shum Pesach, he should bring in L'Shum Pesach. Isn't he an Oinen? Yeah, he is an Oinen, but he's not going to become Tameh. He's not going to become Tameh because he knows that he has to bring this Pesach. And he knows that he can eat that Pesach that night. So what he's going to do is, he's going to make sure that somebody else offers this Pesach on his behalf, joins in with him, and then this is going to be brought. But if the guy dies before Chatzos and his son is not registered with his korban on this korban with him, then he brings it as a shlamim, and these are 2 separate halachas. This was option number 2, answer number 2 according to Abai. Option number 3, answer number 3 according to Rav Shravya. Rav Shravya Amar la'olam demis la'achar Chatzos. Now, the Brisa is talking about where the guy dropped dead right after Chatzos. But, and this is an interesting chiddush, but the father the father that died, was a goises at chatzos. Goises means somebody that's about to die. He's on his deathbed. And Rosh Hashanah says the chiddush here that when we say that chatzos is koveya, that means chatzos is koveya if it appears that this is going to be used as a korban pesach. But a goises, we pass on rov goises in lemisa, that the majority of people that are on their deathbed die. And since this guy was about to die, his korban was not imbued with the kvius of korban pesach, because it was questionable whether it would ever be offered as a korban pesach, and therefore the halacha is that it didn't become a korban pesach yet. Even though chatzos is usually kaver, it's only kaver for something that is going to be reasonably a korban pesach. And since this guy, according to the status that he's at right now, chatzos is not going to likely be able to bring it. It's the korban itself never became a fully fledged korban pesach, and therefore it could be brought as a shlamim. Rav Ashi says, option number 4, la'olam demes la'achar chatzos. No, he died after chatzos, and this price is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon here, the Amar ein baalei chayim nidchim, who disagrees with the premise that we had said in our Mishnah, meaning that the Bryce and the Mishnah disagree with each other. That the Mishnah, according to Rav Huna told us, the Mishnah says that baalei chayim cannot be that baalei chayim can be nidche. Rabbi Shimon says no, baalei chayim cannot be nidche, unless obviously they had a mum. But a baal chai cannot be nidche if it washed out of being able to be brought as one korban, it can be brought as another korban. It's not nidche as long as it's a healthy live animal. It's not nidche. That is option number 4 according to Rav Ashi, and option number 5 according to Ravina. Ravina Amar Kugain, if the animal was separated after chatzos, and the owners died after chatzos, because chatzos cover, and this Bryce holds that chatzos is kover, means that it was only if you were mafresh the animal before chatzos that the moment of chatzos is going to be kover. That's when it's going to stamp it as a korban pesach. What if you didn't pick an animal before chatzos? You're running very late. You slept and you were in traffic and you were coming from Yerushalayim. You were coming up to Yerushalayim and you got into Yerushalayim and you realized, oh my gosh, I didn't have an animal. I've got a whole group of people that are coming, and I wasn't expecting that I was going to be doing this. I was supposed to be on another person's korban, and then they just told me that I'm not anymore, and now I've got to get it, and it's 3:00 in the afternoon. I'm in the third group of it. So you go up and you buy your korban pesach. When does that become a pesach? That becomes a pesach l'chora only at shchita. Even according to the machlokes, Reb Zera and Rabbah, chatzos or shchita, we would only say that it's kover at chatzos if you had separated out before chatzos. That's when chatzos is going to make it into the korban pesach. But if not, it'll be at the point of shchita. V'kasav chatzos cover, and this opinion is that chatzos is kover. So if the guy picked an animal at 3:00 in the afternoon, and he's coming to the Beis Hamikdash 3:30, and at 3:15 he drops dead, so that's when the animal hasn't yet assumed the kedusha of korban pesach. And those are our 5 answers of how to explain this brisa. Okay, the Mishnah 5 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. The Mishnah says, Pesach that was mixed up with zvachim, with other korbanos. The Pesach that got mixed up with a bunch of other korbanos. Says the Mishnah, Kulam yiru ad she'isavu. So if you have a Pesach and you have an Asham and you have an Ola and you have a Chatas, and they all got mixed up. So all of these korbanos have different halachas. Some have Zirkas Adam in one way, and some have Zirkas Adam in another way, and some have Smicha, and some don't have Smicha. They're all different halachas. So you can't mix and change. You wouldn't be able to use one for the other, because they all have different halachas. Says the Mishnah, Kulam yiru ad she'isavu. Each one of them has to roam around until they develop a mum, v'machru, and then they have to be sold. Okay, but what do you do with the money now? Says the Mishnah, v'yavid b'dmei hayafe shebahem mimin zeh. And then you calculate, say you had 3 sheep, and you're not sure which one is which. One is an Ola, and one is an Asham, and one is a Pesach. But one of those sheep costs $100, and one costs 70, and one costs 50. So the halacha is, you don't know which is which. You now have to sell all of them, and then you take that money, and you say, okay, I need to buy an Asham for $100, and an Ola for $100, and a Pesach for $100, because I don't know which one was the most valuable one in terms of how much to sell these animals for. Each one. Where do you get the extra money? You have to buy the value of the most expensive, the choices of each of them for each of the korbanos, and the excess Where do you fund that from? That you have to fund from your own estate. Final halacha of the Mishnah, nis'ar b'becharis. What happens if your Korban Pesach got mixed up with becharis? And bechar is an interesting halacha because bechar has basically all of the same halachas in terms of the Seder HaKrava as the Pesach. It does not need smicha, and the Zikas Adam goes the same way. The only difference is that only a kohen is allowed to eat a bechar. And therefore, says the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon tells us, Im chaburus kohanim, if it was a chabura of kohanim that mixed up one Pesach with 3 becharis, no problem, yachlenu. They can bring them all and make it conditional and say, if this one is a Pesach, then it's a Pesach, and if it's a Bechar, it's a Bechar. Offer all of them an Erev Pesach, and then you just have a lot of fleishiks to eat at your Seder. Because the Seder HaKrava would be exactly the same, and you know, as long as everybody would eat a kazayas from each of those 4 animals, you know with certainty that you have eaten from your Korban Pesach. And Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, we will continue with the din of the Mishnah tomorrow as we enter into the last daf of this parak, and looking forward, please God, to learning with everybody. And reminder that we are starting parak Pesachim on Sunday. Looking forward to seeing you all then, and have yourselves a beautiful day.